Hello, everyone, and welcome to the C2MCI's EDII Catalyst podcast. For new listeners turning in, I'm your guest host, Mark Aloisio, and in this podcast series, we will explore topics of equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigeneity in STEM, featuring guest speakers from diverse backgrounds and perspectives discussing their lived experiences, as well as provide resources and tips on how to create more inclusive and equitable environments. Through this, we hope to inspire you to become a catalyst for change in your own communities and workplaces. Today, we are very excited to have Dr. Mona Rahman, who is currently Research Awards Officer at the VPR office here at Queen's University. We are honored to have her join the conversation today to share about her experiences. Welcome, Mona, and how are you doing today?
And I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Just so kick things off, do you mind if you share a little bit about yourself and your journey through STEM? Where did you grow up? How did you get interested in your area of expertise and your career path to where you are now?
Okay, so I was born and raised on a little town on the edge of Lake Ontario. I am the last of the Hotel Do babies of Kingston, Ontario. My father came to Queens in 1968 to do his master's or his PhD in electrical engineering. So I am a Queens baby. I say that, I've been at Queens from diapers to degrees. Um, so and as a member of the Muslim community, I think a lot of our community back in those days, there's only about 10 families at the time, were either students or faculty at Queens. So I come from a very academic community. I think when I was 5 years old, if you asked me, I would tell you that I want to get my PhD and I want to be a prof. I probably didn't know what a PhD was and what it entailed. I grew up in Kingston. I went the normal Centennial Calvin Park LCVI Queens route. So my schools were, I know people might be shocked, but my schools were pretty diverse because a lot of the graduate students, it's right by Enclacken. So a lot of the graduate students' kids went to Centennial, and that area has always been, with respect to the school populations, the most diverse with respect to ethnicity, or country of origin, but also socioeconomic as well. So it was, you get to know everybody basically, all and learn about everybody. So I did. I am inclined towards STEM in general. My dad was an engineer or is an engineer. A lot of the people I grew up with, their parents were, profs in the electrical engineering department, but not necessarily everybody. I mean, I grew up with knowing Khalid bin Saeed, who taught in political studies, and we learned from him. My friend's dad is a sociologist, so we were exposed to everything. But like I said, I think I inclined towards that, although I did love, like, the languages and as well as history. I love history. And you might think this is like a typical, very stereotypical immigrant South Asian family. You want their kids to be doctors and engineers. Later on, it was like lawyers, but that was a big joke, I think, in our community, within the Muslim community, that you had two options, doctor or engineer, and then later lawyer. My dad, however, is very much not of that mindset. Um, as an engineer, he was also very involved with social justice issues, and he always taught us that, the doctors and the engineers are not going to be saving the world or changing the world. It's the political scientists, the historians, the journalists. So if you are good in those fields, you should go into those fields. So that's my background, and I've always been I think I've lived a very privileged life, in that there's always been people around me that have supported and opened doors for me. And part of that, one of the equity officers at the school board had said that, it's because your parents set up a community for you that was safe. And that was very encouraging. So, I had a math teacher or not a math teacher, a grade six teacher that, we had split classes. And when I hit grade six and there was no more math to do, she brought in math books. So she allowed me to accelerate 2 years in math. I had a physics teacher in grade 11, 12, and his daughter is a friend of mine. So, her dad was the physics teacher. He really wanted to see females excel in physics. So he was very, very encouraging of that. Um, And then, we had a history teacher that empowered us to tell our own stories. So he taught us that history is an interpretation of the facts. And so when you look back through history, you need to realize that there are different perspectives of the same issue. So, in terms of getting into STEM, like I said, I was always on the path of STEM. My quote unquote big sister, you could say, like, so my dad's supervisor had 5 girls. I'm the same age as the youngest one, so we all grew up together. Daughter number 3 went into computing and biochem. Um, and so she put it into my mind in terms of the possibilities outside of engineering and medicine. She eventually defected and did her PhD in computing, but we won't hold that against her. So when I was in high school, I tried to check that out. So I did a science fair project on, the factors affecting enzyme activity. And another teacher contacted a professor at Queens. So my partner and I were able to go and check out a lab. We weren't allowed to use the equipment because, we were 16 or 17, I can't remember. Um, and that kind of thing. I must say that when I applied to university, I applied to engineering and biochemistry at Queen's, engineering at McGill, biochemistry in Toronto. So I was like covering my bases. And at the absolute very last minute, I went to a March break open house and I said, you know what? Engineering is not for me. So at the very last minute, we ran down, changed that, and the rest is history. I became a biochemist. So I guess that's it. In terms of career, like I said, I've always had doors kind of open for me. I was privileged to get a summer lab job from first year university in the biology department because biochem didn't take biochem students until third year when we actually learned biochem. So I worked under the late Dr. Down in biology, dissecting mosquitoes, and the next year decapitating blowflies. Under my graduate student was Steve Wired, who's a prof, I think, at West now. And then in third year, I was able to somehow I got a national award. And that also kind of opened doors in that um, Dr. Flynn, who was head of the department, I was applying for a studentship. He's like, well, Mona, why don't you come work for me? I was like, okay. So yeah, um, unfortunately, I didn't qualify for the studentship anymore because it was like MRC. This is how old I am, not NSRIC. But yeah, so I was able to, work and gain a lot of experience, especially being trained by the senior graduate students there. But yeah, it really that love of science and love of research came from those experiences that I had in the lab. And then he was the one, Dr. Flynn. He's always like, "Hey, so Mona, do you want to go to Harvard?" I'm like, my brother was 4. I'm like, no, I think I want to stick around here and watch this kid grow up. Um, so then he encouraged me to apply for directly into the PhD program at Queen's, which I did. And then, just kept going through that thing. My PhD dissertation was on structural function relationships of Kringle 4 domains of apolipoprotein A, big long thing. So it was a lot of I gained a lot of experience from different things, a lot of things that I had to learn on myself, by myself, because it was a relatively new lab. We didn't. So basically, you find out the skills that you need for that. I did take 2 years off after it was little burned out after that. So I did take, it was meant to be a 1 year break. It turned into 2 before I did a postdoc at the Robarts Research Institute, which was, what was it? So I was looking at smooth muscle cell differentiation and using microarrays to pinpoint gene, like he wanted a genetic fingerprint. And then I took another 2 years off to get married, have a family, start a family, and came back to Queens, called people up, was like, does anybody have any positions? And then I was privileged to join a multidisciplinary research group with Dr. Nakatsu, Dr. Jia, and the late Dr. Zarek, which I really, really appreciate. I can't say enough about Dr. Zarek, honestly. I mean, the second meeting that we had, he looked at me, he's like, I remember you. you were in my class. You sat in the front row." I was like, "Dr. Zarek, I never sit in the front row because I need to put my feet up. I never sit in the front row. I was in the second row." But just that fact, like, he's such an amazing man that to remember us. And the one thing I really appreciated about Dr. Zarek, and this can probably go into some of the systemic barriers. Dr. Zarek always asked me my opinion, and he always listened to my opinion. And I really appreciated that because I found I wasn't always being heard in other spheres.
There's a great transition to the next question. It was being at Queens for such a long time. Would you mind sharing any of these initial experiences that you may have come across with barriers? Your journey seemed very, I wouldn't say straightforward, but it was the next step. You had the wisdom to move forward with it. So could you speak upon maybe pivoting if you had to at any of those points?
Okay. Maybe I'll talk about the reason I pivoted to research administration. Let's talk about that first. If you remember, in Canadian history, we went through a stage where there was no funding. One of the governments had cut funding to fundamental research. So we got to do all the protests and all that. Um, and because of that, it became very difficult, such that even when the government changed and the perspective changed, to be able to get over that deficit was very, very difficult. And so we did have a period when there wasn't funding, but then also when there was, it was very difficult to get as things were ramping up again. And so we came into a situation where, myself and actually my TA, my old TA from analytical chem ended up being my colleague in this group. And but we had to be paid postdoc salaries because of the lack of funding. And then there came a stage where we were like, even that was, it became part-time. And so because it's a multidisciplinary group, like, I worked with Dr. Xia in terms of the structural biology of, so basically looking at the crystal structure of inhibitor enzyme complexes in order to um, optimize inhibitors for this enzyme. So I worked in his lab, but Dr. Akatsu was the main PI. So in that way, I could I could add on some other things that were more with respect to Gia's group in particular. So you kind of sort of piece together full-time work. But it's difficult, right? And that was the situation we were in at that time, when it was very difficult to support fundamental research. And at one point, because Dr. Nakatsu decided that that's enough. He was semi-retired already, so he decided that I'm going to have to close my lab. This is not sustainable. And it was just serendipitous that there was a position that opened up in VP research. I knew the person who had previously held this, and she was actually encouraging me to apply. "Well, why don't you apply for this?" At that time, I said, "No, no, I like research." And then I said, "Well, maybe I'll try this out." And honestly, it's very eye-opening. Research administration. I like it because I can interact with, like, all the researchers across campus rather than your own little silo of DBMS. And even though we were multidisciplinary and I did interact with different departments, just to see the range of what's happening at Queens and understanding like the impact of that was very rewarding. Lifestyle also, when you have little ones, was not a disadvantage in terms of moving to research administration. I mean, as a biochemist, things are not always, don't go 9 to 5, and it could get difficult. So yeah, it was an unexpected pivot, but definitely worth it.
I'm assuming, or I'm guessing, that in this new position, is this when you were part of the co-chair?
Yes, I was, and I think you wanted me to talk about systemic
Yes.
barriers, right?
Yes.
So, like I said, I have had a very I've been living in a bubble, some people would say, but I have had a lot of privilege as I was growing up, either as a child, as a teenager, and within university. And part of it has to do with the fact of my relationship with um, people that came before me. My and then because my father graduated from Queens and went to RMC, but he was still very connected to Queens. So he was involved with the establishment of the Human Rights and Equity Office. He was on the board of QUIC, which was we used to call the International Center back then. Um, and all of our community activities from the Muslim community, because we didn't have a mosque built yet, they centered around Queen's University. So in terms of booking prayer space and everything, we had a lot of connections. I knew where the resources were on campus. So if something were to happen to me or to somebody else, I knew where to go. So in that way, it wasn't really a big deal. I mean, we went through, which I should say that. So in first year, when I was Frosh, I knew that I would not be participating in Frosh Week. It was not somewhere that I would feel comfortable. There's a lot of alcohol, a lot of rowdiness, and things that I knew I would be comfortable with because of the ones that came before me. My frosh year was no means no year, and I know it's in the history books now, but it was a very bad year. Because of that, and it's also the year that the women at École Polytechnique were killed. Um, so there was a lot of things that not directly to me, but there were a lot of things going on. Because of that, there were programs that were put into effect to educate students on campus, which resulted in a lot of positive change. However, a university culture is cyclical, and it really depends on who is on campus. So we had all the programming in the residence across campus. 10 years later, we had students on the highway with signs, which are also very misogynistic. 10 years after that, we had programming and everything, things got fine again. 10 years after that, we had another incident that was misogynistic. So that leads to the need to not just have short-term programs, but to actually develop a campus culture that is not necessarily dependent on who's there, but where you put in infrastructure to say these are the principles by which our campus um, will run. When I was in first year, and I must say that I'm very used to doing things on my own. Like I had to do math on my own in grade 6. We had a chemistry teacher in high school that was very keen on independent learning as well. He was great. But that also taught us a lot. Like it also taught us, because of the encouragement that I got from teachers and from my community, that I knew, we were always taught to challenge ourselves. You don't take the easy way out. If this is what is required, you need to do that. Um, we had an advisor in my department as you're coming into first year and you're picking your courses. We had an advisor that told me, you don't need to take, as a biochemist, we need to take a lot of the same chemistry that the chemists will take. But I was told, you don't need to take these. You can take the general level one and do well in it. And I just said, well, this is the prerequisite for my program, so I'll just take this one. And we found out there was somebody on my bus who wanted to take, I found out an upper year who had commented that, oh, I used to be in biochemistry, but um, I was discouraged from taking the high level math. So I left. So she changed programs. My friends and I and my classmates realized that the women were being told this, but not the men. Um, and so I did well the first year. And so this person stopped telling me, giving me this advice. And my friend and I, when we were in line in second year, we just told all the women, he's going to tell you this. Don't listen, do what you're comfortable with. Um, and I never really understood why. Um, you know, this, it's not that he was, yeah, I don't understand why. Because when I dealt with this person later on, that was not the vibe that I got. Another thing that happened while I think I was in second year, I was in a chemistry tutorial. I have very few instances that happened to me. I'm very grateful for that, but they did happen. I was in a second year chemistry tutorial. Think I was the only woman that wore hijab at that time, in that room, and we were talking about hydroplaning. And the prof looked at me and it's like, well, you might not understand this, but those Canadians over there will. And one of those Canadians was my classmate who is of Chinese heritage from Gloucester. And I was taken aback. So I've never had to deal with things like that. I was taken aback and I was kind of like, it's like, I grew up in Kingston. Like, I mean, lake's right there. I grew up skating on the lake. So that really threw me. Um, but it was that attitude that I then realized throughout the decades was not new to this particular person. Another thing that happened is when I received my a national award, it was covered by the Wig Standard, um, but it was never covered by the journal. And the reason it was at the Wig Standard is probably because one of our community members who's a journalist there saw it because he called my dad too. It's like, oh, did you see this? But it wasn't covered by the journal. The same thing when I graduated. Usually they've list the award winners in the yearbook. So that year I received the Governor General's silver medal, but my name is not in the yearbook as having done that, and I think it's the only one. So it's interesting. Um, you could say it was just an oversight, but looking back, it's like, well, it seems like more of a trend, and it really depends on who's in charge and what their perspective is. And the last thing I remember is when I did apply for grad school. I mean, of course, I was going to stay at Queen's because, um, but I did apply to other places. And one university, I mean, I didn't really even look at it because I wasn't planning on going there. But my father looked at it, at the letter, and said, they give you a letter as if you're an international student. And I'm like, oh, well, whatever. I'm not going there anyways. It's like, no, you need to do something about this. So, I talked to my mentor, Dr. Flynn, who was head of the department. He looked at it, got upset, called the head of the department over there, and they issued me an apology. But I mean, it just shows that these things happen. We do dismiss them, but it is more significant than we might think it is because it's not just about me. It's about how are you processing these things for everybody who are, you're treating people differently.
As we move forward in this, and as you mentioned in your discussion there, you we have a cyclic nature within universities, and with that, there's a certain committee that has been brought on, and you were its inaugural chair with Stephanie Simpson. UCARE was the Committee of University Council on Anti-Racism and Equity. Having these resources on campus is critical for the student body promoting and supporting each other, especially when that knowledge is almost lost generationally. Can you speak more onto this program and how it strives to better the campus as a whole?
So there were certain, I mean, I've been here for a long time, but there were certain years that I was not on campus. During those years, I think when Principal Wolf was principal, there were a couple of reviews that were done. There was the Henry report and then the Picardy report, which is his principles, like basically I can't, it's a huge long name. And they put forth some recommendations, like some points as to what was happening on campus, but also some recommendations. So I believe that's when I came back to campus. I believe UCARE was established in order to, at first, to look at these recommendations and to, if not implement them directly, but oversee the implementation and basically be sort of like like an overseer, just to make sure that they were being done and it wasn't just another report. And this is the problem. It's like we do all of these reviews and we put out these reports, but what happens after? It's like, okay, well, yeah, things are not great. What happens after? So UCARE was formed in order to oversee the implementation of these points of the Pickett report. So yes, I was inaugural chair, and it was basically try and get things set up. How are we going to do this? There were a lot of meetings in terms of just basically what is this committee going to do? How is it going to do it? So since I left, they've now put together working groups, and now there's sub councils that deal with things that were um, pinpointed as to be very crucial in terms of maintaining a culture, the culture that we want on campus. Because as I said, the culture of a campus depends on the people that are there. Um, and like for the students, you'll get a completely new generation about every 10 years, which is why we saw that change in culture. And so I can see here, I printed it out, with respect to student recruitment, forming an inclusive committee, the academy, the curriculum that we're teaching to people, faculty and staff recruitment, but also retention, because that's always also a problem. So like just everything culture, you could say. But it is something that we really need to keep an eye on because we talk about, oh, well, that's Queen's tradition. There are things that are seen to be Queen's tradition that weren't being done when I was an undergrad. And things change according to, like I said, who's there, but according to also what's happening outside. Um, one one thing that I should mention is so when I was an undergrad, we went through two Gulf Wars. And, I had a friend that was assaulted in a cafe by somebody who was out on parole and drunk. There were death threats at Anklaken, and I think in the engineering department. But if you talk to my friend, who's now, it's been a long time, her experience at Queens wasn't tainted by that because the attitude then is like, these are just a minority group that were loud. My friends would get yelled at on the street, but they didn't take it as an all-encompassing, everybody hates us type of thing. So it was recognized. And because the administration at that time, because we had a lot of connections, were very quick to rectify situations, to make statements and just make sure that students were okay. After 9/11, the people that grew up after that grew up in a very different way. Now we've got 24-hour media, we've got social media, and it hits it hits more, but you find that there is an increase in discriminatory behavior, harassment. We see a rise in Islamophobia. We see a rise, it's always in parallel, a rise in anti-Semitism. There were attacks on racialized professors that I'd never seen before. Um, and so it's a different world. And so you need to have different infrastructure to maintain that, to sort of provide that inclusive culture, but also to say, well, these things are not, these are our principles, and we do not accept this type of behavior. Um, so yeah, it's different, and this is the reason why the student group Kumsa had, they could see this rise of incidents against the Muslims, and they didn't feel heard by the administration at the time. So they started documenting it because we are a research based university. They started documenting things, and they had a website. And at the same time, they were also documenting the cases of anti-Semitism because you did see that was happening. So they made a campaign against hate. For which in 2008 they received the Equity Award from the Human Rights Office. But the thing is, it was student led. And I think that is something that we put a lot of burden on. The students take up a lot, do a lot, for things that we should be doing as people that are more permanent on the campus in order to maintain that inclusive environment so that when people are coming from wherever they're coming, they feel that this is their home away from home, or a place that is safe to learn and learn about different perspectives. So nothing wrong with that.
For time, however, we'll swap it to our live audience. If anyone in the audience right now would like to ask Mona a question about our conversation today, please speak up, unmute yourself, or the chat is available. Just a quick tight question. Any recommendation for those next generations, or as maybe someone's coming into the academic sphere, would you have any recommendations for those future academics?
Um, for academics, I would say that one of the things that we seem to have lost, just judging from my my own journey, is the openness to to other ways of knowing. We don't all think the same way. We all have our own unique perspectives. There's indigenous ways. People, as a Muslim, for me, education was very much emphasized growing up. The whole scientific, like, I will tell you in history, scientific methodology came from the Muslim scientists. So that is something within how we were raised, that always striving for knowledge, no matter if, like, where it takes you, but also to acknowledge that there are different ways of looking at things, and which leads to negative data is still negative data, and it still tells a story. Maybe looking at things in a more holistic way in terms of what the results would be. So just to be open to different perspectives in terms of social studies and whatever. Also, I mean, we all come with our own perspectives, and there's actually a verse in the Quran that says, "Oh humanity, we've created you from male and female and made you into nations and tribes, so that you may know each other." So to learn different things, different ways of knowing is only that diversity is only there to enrich a community. I mean, I always quote my dad that said, he said, ignorance leads to mistrust, suspicion, which leads to hate and prejudice. And so to get rid of the hate, or to fight the hate, you have to counter it with education to get rid of the ignorance. And I always say, it's like, baby, I mean, Yoda might have said it as well, but I'm going with my dad, which is based on that Quranic message of diversity is there so we can learn from each other. That seems to, which I've noticed through the years, because now I can say I've been here for decades, that discussion, that environment of being able to have the debates and the discussions. You don't have to agree with one another, but you can have the discussion so you can see where the other person is coming from. We don't have that as much as we used to, which is we should have in an academic environment.
That's a great quote from your father. If Yoda did it, who cares? But your dad, that's the wisdom.
But
Awesome. Jyoti, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mona. One question that I have, I mean, you're very humble in the way that you talk about the challenges that you've had as a woman of color, not only in science through the education system, but also probably even being on some of these committees, right? But here's the thing, and knowing that you have the support from your network, your father, who's gone through the university system and everything like that. We have a lot of, folks of color that are going through some similar things because it's, as you say, cyclical. It does come back, it doesn't go. And I think the repeated education is always needed. What would you tell if there was a piece of advice you would give to folks that don't have that sort of network who are going through this? How should they cope? Is there something that you can give them as piece of advice?
I was in a UCare meeting once, and there was a student that said she was thinking about running for the AMS, but she's never seen people that look like her that have run for this. And I said, 10 years ago, the head of the AMS was a Muslim woman, racialized Muslim woman who wears hijab of Bangladeshi origin. But the problem with the university is that we have a very short historical memory. And one thing that I noticed, and I will say, because, like, so as somebody who was a child of the 70s, but my family's from Bangladesh. There were 2 to 4 families, depending on the year, Bangladeshi families in Kingston. Forget the students. The students come and go. Nobody spoke my language, my language of heritage. My identity growing up was I'm not American, I'm not Pakistani, I'm not an engineer, I'm not going into engineering. No, I'm not going to be a doctor. There's a lot of no's. I'm always the minority. in whatever circle I'm in, whether it was now it's different, but in those days, I was a minority in the Muslim community. I was a minority in the academic Muslim community. I was, I'm just different. And I always say half of what you assume about me is probably wrong. When I taught just very briefly 2 weeks in a biochemistry course, and I knew some of the students. And one of the things that was said to me is like, I've never had somebody that looks like me in that position. And I understand that if you see somebody that looks like you in something, it opens your eyes as to what the possibilities are. But for those that are students, I would say that it doesn't matter if you're the only one. You don't have to see people in those things to for that to be open to you. You could be the first. And I think that's the thing, is like to know your abilities, to know your strengths, know your weaknesses, but also don't dampen your expectations of yourself. My motto has always been, I don't know where I got this, high hopes, low expectations. You have to try. I mean, you see these cheesy things in terms of reach for the stars. Even if you don't get there, you'll at least hit the moon. But I think that's true. I think we tend to limit ourselves and the things that we will pursue based on whether or not we see who else is out there. I will say that as one of the things I remember as I'm looking back on my life, I did note that there are some things in terms of I didn't feel I was being heard. I would be in group meetings and I would make a suggestion, nobody would catch up on it. And then later I'd find this paper. It's like, look, they did what I said we should have done, and now we can't do it anymore. So, like just people sort of doing their own thing. Like that's why it's so important to listen to different perspectives. Um, Sometimes this, I mean, I didn't speak up as much as I probably did it today, because I'm at the age where I don't care anymore. But I would speak up for other people. It's hard to speak up for yourself. So that's what I would say. I mean, I think it's really important, Jyoti, to have a network of like-minded people to give yourself just that confidence, but also to know that, you can sort of go your own path, and you shouldn't be hesitant to do something if you really believe in this is what I want to do.
Thank you. That's great advice.
One last fun question, though, given the Carbon to Metal Coating Institute. Mona, what is your favorite element?
This is really difficult because I've been out of the lab for so long. But I will say I like nickel. So I did a lot of histidine tagged purification of proteins. I loved the way the nickel would change color from, like, depending on the pH, from green to like a nice baby blue. And then it was great when I could use cobalt instead. So then you get the pink. Because, if what's the fun in science if you can't make science fun? And you can always find the fun in science.
Well, thank you very much, Mona. I appreciate you having us on for this episode of the EDI Catalyst podcast. And thank you for our live audience for coming and hanging out, and hope to see some of you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.